Welcome everyone to the show. My name is James Anthony from the James Anthony Report. This is the James Anthony Report podcast. I will never forget it. Friday, March 13th, 2020 was when the government, your government, under the executive direction of the first Trump administration, declared a national emergency to mobilize against the coronavirus pandemic. It was Friday the 13th. And so this Friday the 13th, I thought it would be nice to visit with you all and look back at some of the stories I've reported on more recently and how it lines up with what's going on at this very moment. I also want to tell you, and I will just lay it out right now, that while many people, even those on the right, continue to mock those of us who report on things like actual lizard people conspiracies, or bring the news about conspiracies involving, say, flat earth stuff, I think it's disingenuous to deny the weird sort of Friday the 13th that we've all been living in since, 2016. To prove my point, I will point to the various memes that you see out there which accurately describe that the difference between conspiracy or conspiracy theory and reality is often, now anyways, only a matter of weeks. So laugh all you want, but I will continue to talk about these things as I did with the Harvard study, not just any school, this is Harvard, theorizing lizard people and what have you. I can also prove that what we see as our elected representatives in government aren't actually running the show by reminding you that the best possible chance for a foreign nation to attack the US would have been under Joe Biden. Whether or not you believe that was the same Joe from years ago in Congress, and I can entertain the idea without losing any street cred, because the current president actually reposted something himself on this a few weeks ago. But whether or not you believe Joe was Joe, whoever it was cooked. And we knew it then. But of course, memories are short nowadays, and look where we are currently. About to go to war. So why do the war machines continue to churn under a president who ran as a no more wars candidate? Why? But it's been a long time, and so I have to ask what's been in the news lately. Elon and the MAGA Civil War is the first thing that comes to my mind. Well, guess what? We've talked about that. In fact, months before the election in a video about Trump's inner circle. The silent rise of AI in the news? Check. Everything from deep fakes to harvesting DNA to World War III. Yes, I've done videos on all this. Again, mostly before the election took place. Palantir? Funny how everyone wants to talk about that now. You can check that one off as well. But let me start by saying how good it is to be back with you again. So much is happening that it's difficult to keep up sometimes, but from the very start, I told you a few things that stand out when I listen to other commentators talking about the news as it happens. I came before you in crystal clear audio and said that I didn't trust Elon. Not that I didn't like him. I don't know him, obviously, or his allegedly 20 devil-worshipping offspring, but he never passed the smell test for me. And it doesn't take a lot to dig in and see some of the stories I present and discern that for yourself. Politics is nothing more than bread and circus. Look that one up if you're not sure the reference there. And I wouldn't put it past any of the elite class to stage a public feud to sever ties with the Trump administration and recoup a large portion of people who spend upwards of $80,000 for a Tesla, but who couldn't stand the close association Trump had with Musk. There's a civil war happening in the MAGA movement. Right. But can a war ever really be civil? You see where I'm going with that? Unlike the others you listen to who don't like to brag, I actually love to tell you that I told you so. Under the right circumstances, of course. I didn't fawn over Elon, and I've been critical of and called out his various companies for the things that I'd heard and read about in the propaganda arm of our government known as the news. Check and check. And as I've said before, I vividly remember bringing you all a video about the possibility of multiple Bidens in the White House. Rather, one false Biden with a clip of his daughter-in-law stating that Joe had actually died several years before. Could have been a deep fake, sure. Could have been sour grapes on the daughter's part, sure. But why then is Donald Trump retruthing a story about that very thing, stating that it wasn't actually Joe in the White House? And why now? Check and check again, my friends. You've heard it said, I'm sure, that trust is earned and not given. So I've come to trust my gut on these things. More so than the narrative shaped in the mainstream anyway, which, by the way, seems to change all the time to fit whatever direction they want us to go. It's all very 1984. And I also vividly remember telling everyone just after the election that the political left was quiet for the time being and just waiting for the right moment to do what they always do. That the silence wasn't an indication of defeat. That the popular vote didn't mean a mandate for them to act in a diplomatic fashion. And what's been in the news recently? Oh yeah, LA is on fire. Want another one? Should I continue? Let's see. How about Cash and Bongino? Wait, you know what? Let's just stay with Bongino for this. I did a report not too long ago talking about a company called Red Seat Ventures that produces most of your favorite conservative podcasts, and how that company is being bought out by Fox Corporate. Next thing you know, we see Mr. Bongino on Fox News telling you and me to move along. There's nothing to see here. But as he always likes to say, or liked to say on his show, follow the money. Just follow the money. Now let's be clear on this. I have no inside baseball on Bongino. I don't know him and don't care. Just a gut feeling that all of you probably could agree with here that something's amiss. All other personal conspiracies aside, because again, I don't know about Bongino's business dealings, his shows, or anything else, but I think we all expected a little more from an ex-Secret Service agent when it came time for commenting on the Trump shooter situation in Butler County, Pennsylvania. But I'll leave that there. This show isn't about trying to prove to you, who are listening, that I was right. Though again, I love saying it. But these aren't the right circumstances. I told you from the start that we'd have some fun with this. However, the time has come again for the news cycle to be rip-tearing through space and time so incredibly fast, and by the way, credit to those like Bongino and others who do this sort of thing on a daily basis. I still think you are ultimately a force for the better. But what I had to do, I should say, was focus on more broad, generalized topics. And one of those was the unfounded, keyword there, unfounded, attacks on the Catholic faith. And in case you missed it, in all the media mess over the last few months, United States Catholic bishops are suing the Trump administration for freezing assets allocated for refugee resettlement in the United States. As you all know, or should know, the Pope is supposed to be the vicar of Christ on earth. And so let's assume you disagree with some of the things he says with regard to politics or socioeconomics. As a Catholic, assuming you are, or even if you're not, does this really raise any doctrinal issues for you? It's really interesting to me to see mostly or as close to secular people paying attention to the Pope only when they want to, and only when they disagree with some seemingly political statement coming from Rome. Now, I'm not here to defend every single thing the Catholic Church does or ever did. But in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, to the best of my knowledge, takes a stance very similar to the United States itself. That if a wealthy country is able to, you are to take migrants fleeing persecution. But never to the detriment of the new country, and not just for any reason, are the migrants to flee their homes. I've heard many people argue recently that the church resides behind a wall, and that the penalty for any sort of breach is a 15-year sentence. But this should seem reasonable and not a contradiction to anything that was said recently, considering the former pope said nothing when Biden was in office. The truth is, the Catholic Church has safeguards in place, things like excommunication, and the ability to deny anyone the Holy Eucharist. And so it seems to me that the real problem here is a weak and ineffective church in 2025. Biden should have been denied communion for his stance on things like abortion. He did go against church teachings by opening the southern border to allow anyone to come through unabated. But of course, this didn't happen. And now we have even bigger problems than before. You know, we have posted up at the James Anthony Report website one that shows the government plan in the 1960s to disrupt Christians through the CIA operation known as Chaos, by which the likes of RFK, MLK, and JFK were all taken out. And I have to ask those of you listening, doesn't it seem strange that nearly every slander, every negative depiction of a Christian in media, radio, television, etc., are all aimed at Catholics? Think of it. The Exorcist, the band Ghost, Marilyn Manson, and every criticism of a Mel Gibson movie since The Passion are just a few examples of Hollywood attacking Christians through, specifically, the Catholic Church. A church that stood firm as the poor man's church, that took care of Italian American families like my own and Irish Catholics when they came over, and were all looked at as less than human. Now, stay with me here. I'm not even suggesting that mostly military-aged males that have been allowed to trot over into our country and start terrorizing innocent civilians while taking in all sorts of government benefits are to be looked at as anything other than straight-up criminals. But what I am saying is that a weak church, along with a coordinated government plan, have allowed us to become selective amnesiacs when it comes to the faith. Yes, in this country we have a separation of church and state, but for most of human history, the law was not separate from religion or faith. In fact, I would argue that a revisionist history has taken place with several high-profile institutions claiming that the separation of powers which arose from the Protestant Reformation was designed to keep the state from bearing down on the church. The simple fact that Protestants sought to get away from the church's role in their lives should be enough to refute this. Of course, we live in a privileged situation where we can pick and choose a la carte style what we choose to adhere to as far as doctrine is concerned. But the truth is that before the Reformation there remained one steadfast church, in the Catholic Church that is, that safeguarded Christendom so that 1500 years later, Luther could nail his 95 Theses to the door and essentially splinter off what has now become over 45,000 denominations of Christianity. And my friends, this is where we get woke churches and so-called pastors chastising the president. Remember that? For his call to enact the largest deportation effort in American history. This is where we get woke depictions of Christ in Hollywood, as is the case for a film starring a black lesbian at the Hollywood Bowl, among other things. Put it this way. Think about this. We have some important documents called the Constitution, right? And we also have a governing body to interpret the Constitution for future generations. And it's no different for the Catholic faith. The documents, of course, being Scripture, and the governing body being ecumenical councils to interpret the Word for all time. But if we choose to ignore and pick and choose what we want to believe at any given moment, that's not only not Catholic, but not Christian at all. So just to recap this, since Christ, you had one single church for 1500 years. All through that time, the church, meaning the Catholic peoples, fought battles and excommunicated those accused of heresy, all in an effort to safeguard Christianity. To the point that when Muslims were essentially taking over by force, by pillaging and other atrocities, the Pope called to unite all of Eastern and Western Europe to once again establish the Christian faith by Holy Crusade. And all that happened so that one man, Martin Luther, could mail in some grievances because he didn't like certain things that the church regarded as necessary. Does this all sound familiar at this point? You see, without the Catholic faith, that word, by the way, meaning universal, you wouldn't have had anything to reform in the first place. And this is exactly what is playing out in our society in America today. We all love to spout off about the separation of church and state, especially when it suits our own needs, but laws cannot be uncoupled from morality. And that morality was something established by the early church. Take a look at the seat of Protestantism in England today. It's a joke. Muslim stabbings are a daily occurrence, and we have such a splintered and fractured church that it doesn't know how to appeal to young men looking for a purpose anymore, not to go all Andrew Tate on you, but instead is okay with appealing to the woke. And say whatever you want about Muslims in America today, the fact is that in many parts of the world, weapons training from an early age calling us the great devil is a very real thing. We can have the discussion, of course, on how best to evangelize, but the problem is so bad that maybe it wouldn't hurt to listen to a church that to this day still does not allow female clergy, that called for the Crusades back then but asks for acts of service today. A church that has kept councils intact, the same councils that established Christian dogma that even Protestants believe to this day. But councils that stand to interpret the Word of God for the future church. Now, what if things had gone differently? I think that follows as a legitimate question. What if the King of England, who wanted a divorce because his wife was barren, by the way, had never made Protestantism the official church of England? We may have had in this country no separation of church and state, but let me ask, with everything that's going on now, would that really be or have been so bad? I'd argue for a united church instead of whatever the hell being a Christian today actually means. It's weak and it appeals to no one. Everyone wants a separation. No one understands what it means to follow in the faith. And they'll point to all sorts of examples of hypocrites in the Christian world without realizing that most of what they criticize isn't even what the original church believed in the first place. They'll point to Mormons as an example of the crazy. Well, Mormons aren't Christian. There, I said it. And so we're sometimes all stuck as conservatives defending the values and culture instead of the actual merits of belief. I know. Insert your Jordan Peterson reference here. I get it. So maybe that's enough evangelizing for today, because as an American, I am fully aware that we don't hold monoliths or monolithic structures in high regard, and that includes the Catholic Church. But I will say what's intriguing to me is that while conservatives have traditionally been skeptical of big government and liberals have traditionally been skeptical of big corporations, the MAGA crowd, of which I consider myself, by the way, have found themselves in nearly the exact same spot as liberals in the 1960s. Think about it. We, generally speaking, agree that we need to be stewards of the earth, that we shouldn't pollute or put unnecessary chemicals in our food. We support a more isolationist view of things when it comes to war, especially the one in Ukraine right now. And we support the idea of the free exchange of ideas and free speech. And these are things that liberals on college campuses in, say, San Francisco back in the day supported. But not now, because, Orange Man bad. And the liberals have gone full war hawk. They encourage censorship and defend big pharma. And on that point, I did do a story about the latest rounds of injectable technology, you know what I'm talking about, that is undoubtedly already in production for the bird flu. Now, I mentioned in the video what I think, which is to say that Trump is mobilizing efforts to stave off another media blitzkrieg of attacks about an incoming pandemic and is preparing the troops to combat all this by being as prepared as possible. But like usual, at the end of the video, I ask why. Why would another round of deadly shots be coming our way from a president that the media hates? Shots that many of his own supporters do not support. Personally, I think by extension it has to do with choice, but he's, as we've seen thus far, and over the course of even the last term, he's focused on the economy, almost to a fault. And yes, he's had meetings with Bill Gates, as we laid out for you in another different report. And yes, he appointed a former Biden executive as head of the White House Pandemic Preparedness Office, whatever that means. But aside from the fact that liberals should be ecstatic about this, he is simultaneously opening the door up to conversation on the topic of vaccinations. And last I checked, RFK did take the lead on this. And guess what? It will create jobs centered around this response. Remember the Obama administration who so gleefully told us about all the jobs they created under his presidency? Yeah, well, for the very first time, that administration started counting the medical sector in this country as part of those job numbers. Numbers that were created in the aftermath of the retarded, ridiculous Obamacare initiative that did next to nothing to help average, hardworking people like you and me. And so at the end of the video, this video we have posted about new mRNA bird flu shots forthcoming by the Trump administration, I ask at the end, very simply, why? My opinion? I'll give you my opinion. My opinion is because it's going to happen. A large-scale effort to shake down Trump and his economy is coming. There are interviews after interviews of high-level Bill Gates types saying as much. As you can see, I think it's plainly evident that the Democratic Party is currently in free fall, with its proxies in the media doing the same and pissing in the wind when they're not. Look at MSNBC, CNN, even Fox to some degree. And the sad part is there are some good people. There are good people that are working to just put food on the table. Believe me, I know, having worked in the mainstream previously in my career. But I say all this tonight to tell you that we've been compromised a very long time ago, and it's a striking, actually stunning thing to realize just how short our memories are when it comes to politics. The pundit reported not too long ago that Donald J. Trump was apparently cutting aid to the Ukraine unless they offer up $5 billion worth of rare earth minerals. This, what I'm talking about here, of course, goes back to the Lights Out story we did prior to the article that I saw, where I show the initiative put forth in 2003 by our wonderful elected representatives in the swamp, like Hillary Clinton, essentially calling for mapping out the ocean floor to drill offshore. So now, some 22 years later, we're calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And the implications of this, as I have said before, and we were way ahead of the curve on this, is that that body of water is no longer considered international waters. We need these minerals to help usher in the digital prisons and 15-minute smart cities of the future. And how fun it's going to be, how fun it already is, to watch absolutely no one in the mainstream discuss this. They don't discuss the real intention behind these new measures. Maybe one day everyone else will catch up to you, this audience. But as I continue my crusade here, I also continue my crusade against stupid idiots like Bill Maher. Now, he also talked about this recently, but in typical normie fashion, he just made it about Donald J. Trump chest beating because, well, Bill's a beta, and his audience know nothing. Certainly not humor. Here's a clip of something quite disgusting that was said on his real-time show. Take a listen.
Number someone has to take Donald Trump aside and let him know that when he's dancing, he looks like he's jerking off two guys at once.
You know, it wouldn't be so bad, maybe, coming from someone who himself calls other grown men sweetheart. And who is a, quote, confirmed bachelor. There's actually an old Hollywood story about Bill throwing these lavish, extravagant parties at his house in California, and he's been known to make a grand entrance late at night, all dressed up. The one I'm referencing here actually dressed up as a star-spangled Uncle Sam. Can you believe that? Complete with top hat and cane And as far back as I can remember, I always felt like Bill was a little light in the loafers. Just an opinion, just a thought. Like, my question is, how does no one else see this? He's always lauded as some intellectual ladies' man and is always photographed with what I think are paid arm candy. But he's always photographed with women on his arms. But example after example seems to prove he's not exactly being honest with himself. Of course, being a comedian is the perfect closet for a guy like Bill because anything he says, he can just say it and say that it was in the context of comedy. Even though he's never actually been funny, and I know that's subjective, but in this case, he made Donald J. Trump to be the object. Like, well, we know what you're thinking, Bill. We know what's on your mind. Because Trump just looks to most of us, I'd say, like an 80-year-old man dancing. Nothing more, nothing less. But I guess you see what you want. And so I'll leave it there. I hope you all have a great Friday the 13th. Make sure you like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. Talk soon.
Go to JamesAnthonyReport.com or click the link in the description to support our sponsors. James Anthony Report was made possible by garbage-ass people like you. Thank you.